This episode of the Quality Impact Podcast is proudly sponsored by Catalyst Consulting, specialists in Lean Six Sigma, operational excellence, and business transformation solutions. Catalyst Consulting helps organizations achieve lasting success through customized training, consultancy, and support.
Welcome to Quality Impact, a podcast from the Chartered Quality Institute. I'm your host, Rashad Issa, chairman of the CQI. In this episode, we're focusing on women shaping quality. Today's guest is Lou Doyle, a leader in quality, change management, and education improvement. She's the co-founder of Mesma, an award-winning AI software and advisory service that supports regulatory bodies, training providers, and accreditation bodies. Lou works with leaders across education and employment support to drive meaningful change. She's also a strategic consultant with Strategic Development Network, SDN, an academy chair, a college governor, and a non-executive director bringing hands-on expertise to the sector. Welcome, Lou.
Hello, it's lovely to be here. That made me sound very grand. I might come every week just to listen to that, Rashad.
Well, we are delighted to have you here and listen to all of your insights and your experience. Why don't we dive straight in? I would like to understand, how has the role of women in quality changed over the years?
It's a great opening question. I had a feeling you might ask me that. And actually, when I was first wondering about it, Rashad, I wondered if it had. I thought, well, actually, has the role of women in quality changed? And then I think it's not until I started to get under the surface of things like working practices and the type of sectors that I work in where it started to become a bit clearer for me. So if I summarize it, I think it's changed because there are more of us. I think it's changed marginally in terms of how many of us there are in leadership positions. And I suspect we might talk about why that's only in the margins as we go through in today. I think that in sectors where women haven't traditionally been on the scene, if you like, we're seeing some improvements in that. And that in itself leaks into the quality space. So there are green shoots, but there's more to do. I'm reluctant always to talk about COVID, but I think what COVID has done is it's made us change working practices in a way that potentially benefits more women coming into our space in terms of what we do. In the sectors I work in, you mentioned them in education and employability, we have perhaps more women in quality roles than you might see in other sectors like engineering and manufacturing. And what I'm seeing are some really powerful women around me who are making a huge impact in the areas that they work in.
I like that it's green shoots, but hopefully it'll become forests very soon rather than green shoots. Have you faced any difficulties, or how was your journey in the quality profession?
Do you know what's interesting in that question, Rashad? And I hope I can give this in a way which is perhaps even advice for other women, is there has been no point in my career where I've ever seen being a woman as being a barrier to being successful. And that's a mindset in the first instance. And I think that goes back to probably the way that I was brought up, the people that I've spent time with. It just never occurred to me that it would get in the way of me being successful. As I've grown up, I guess, you start to realize that other women don't have that support around them. And therefore, the challenges they face would be far more than mine. And my job is to make sure that I can help, reach down. Is it Hillary Clinton who used the phrase, there's a special place in hell reserved for women who don't support other women? And therefore, I see myself, as having a really important role in that. Where I have learned some hard lessons along the way is perhaps when I'm based here in the UK, but when I've perhaps worked in cultures where a woman being around a senior table is not as openly welcomed, perhaps, as it might be here. I found some difficulties in that space, and I've had to navigate around those. I hope I've done it in a way that's sensitive to that particular culture, but also demonstrated the value in having women around those tables along the way. And I think it takes me slightly outside of your question around a quality space, but I think it's a relevant one. There are women like me and my co-founder, Carol, who want to be able to make a difference as entrepreneurs in the space of quality management. And I think the latest statistics are 3% of investment globally still goes to women. That's appalling. It's even less than that if you happen to be a Black woman, which is shameful and something we need to do something about. So actually, if we want people to be entrepreneurial, women to be entrepreneurial, to make a difference in general, but also in the quality space, we have to deal with that. It's simply not good enough. And the other one I touched on before is, how do we reach down and help other women to be able to navigate their career in a way that puts us into strategic quality roles. We're not there yet. There's work to do, even if I'm big enough and ugly enough to keep running around and just knocking down the doors because I don't see them there in the first place.
It's really very interesting that you say it is a mindset, because it is a mindset for every professional in the industry, especially for women that want to take that step. I also believe that there are lots of things we can do collectively as a human race to try and remove barriers and empower women, even if it wasn't only women supporting women, but in general, bringing that level of equality into how we interact in the profession as a whole. How, from your experience, how have you gone through that and witnessed different support and different removal of barriers, even though you're a go-getter from the start?
You're absolutely right, and there's a macro view on that, as you say, Rashad, which are societal norms in things that we have to change and continue to have to change. And again, that's regardless of sex. When we start to look into organisations, there are things that we need to look at which are fundamentally structural and are based on custom and practice and perhaps unconscious bias in the way that things happen in organisations. There's lots of things we can do at a really practical level to knock down barriers. One is to look deeply at your recruitment practices within an organisation. So actually, are there things within the way that we recruit? Of course, there isn't anything that overtly says we're only going to recruit men into these roles. But actually, when you look at the way you're recruiting, where are the people coming from into quality positions that mean that there's an inbuilt barrier for women to be able to get into that space? So I suspect, and you would know this far better than me, if you work in engineering, because engineering, in some parts of engineering, is male dominated, if we're then recruiting from that same pool, then we put a barrier in place of women being able to move into that space. I think there are things around how do we be more creative in our recruitment practices? So how are we using apprenticeships, for example? How are we speaking to children at primary school level? There's a wealth of research that demonstrates the importance of that now. We're not giving them careers advice, but we're making them aware of the possibilities that are there, and that actually that spirit of you can't be what you can't see really comes to mind when you start to speak to people at whatever age of the education system. So they're not short-term fixes, but they are about thinking about the next generation and how those things can come through. So I think number one is recruitment practice. How do we make sure that we're fishing from the widest possible pond in being able to bring people, women, into the space where they don't see those barriers as being there? I think the second one is around development. So if you're looking within your organisation, looking at the development routes that deliberately target women, that allow those women to see the route into quality. And if you looked at somewhere like the HE sector in a very different space, the Athena Swan Award that exists within HE in order to encourage more women to engage in research is a perfect example of a way that we can reach into that space to encourage women to come forward and to recognise that they have a voice within that organisation in order to be able to elevate their status and career. And I think the third one I'd add is how are we mentoring women within the workplace in order to help them to reach the skills, a level that they want to be at and take the career route that they want to take. So a combination of recruitment, development, mentoring are practical things that I think any organisation can do that allows you to move people who may not be the traditional route into the roles that we might want to see them in.
You definitely touched base on increasing that visibility, and I'm aware of an organization called STEM, which the CQI partners with as well. And they do a lot around raising the profile of a day in the life of. And lots of schools across the UK are open to invite professionals from different sectors to come in and have a session with students at different ages, depending on the programs, and just come in for half an hour or for 1 hour and talk about your role and get questions. That is a good way to raise the profile of professionals.
It really is, Rashad. And I think it even goes beyond sector. So for quality professionals, it's actually how do we elevate the status of the occupation? And in preparation for today, I read some of the excellent case studies on your website where women have talked about how they found their way into those roles. And I think what always stands out for me, and I'm probably one of those people who are in quality roles, is very few of us, in fact, I don't think I've seen one where the person said, I set out to work in quality. You often see the language of, well, I kind of fell into it. I found my way into it through a different route, perhaps came in as a trainer, I think I saw in one of your case studies. So we have a visibility issue with our occupation. And that's the same for lots of occupations. So actually the example you gave there of going into schools allows us to think about how do we give visibility to the occupation, because big organisations, actually small organisations, have many different roles other than the front-facing one that you see. If you want to work in the NHS, there are thousands of different roles in the NHS that don't require you to be a nurse or a doctor. So how do you show people the art of the possible in that space, I think is so valuable. One of the things we do with the Academy Chair that I'm involved in as a governor is that we take it beyond just the awareness of someone's job and actually allow businesses to create projects that our students, who are very young, right down to early years, are able to interact with. So they start to see the relevance of the STEM topic, if you like, in the context of an occupation. So there's some really exciting initiatives all over the UK and I'm sure elsewhere in the world that actually allow us to start to think about long-term strategic thinking that move us, as you said earlier, from green shoots towards something that looks a bit more like a forest.
The art of possibilities.
Absolutely.
I'm going to touch on that in a moment because you've already started, opened the door for some of the questions that I have. But I'm going to pause for a second and I'm going to ask you, Lou, as a quality professional, how do you define quality?
Quality is an outcome, and it's an outcome from the choices and actions that people take. And those choices and actions that people take have to be underpinned by systems and processes and resources that allow them to be at their best.
Outcomes and choices. Thank you very much for that. So I'm going to go back and tie that into the three action items. It's about recruitment, it's about development, and it's about mentoring and coaching. So in your opinion, why is gender diversity important in quality leadership and governance frameworks?
I know we don't have all day to talk about it, Rashad, but I could talk about that all day. I think I'll take a step back, actually, if I may, and I'll just frame what I'm about to say in the context of the two sectors I spend most time in, which is further education and employability. And the reason why that focus on quality is so crucial in our space is because of the high stakes nature of what we do. So it's high stakes in the sense that if we don't deliver quality, then the next generation of construction workers or engineers or the people that put wheels on aircrafts or the hairdresser that isn't going to burn your head, by mixing the wrong type of colour when you go to the hairdresser. There maybe we can see mine is definitely there. All of those are absolutely critical roles. The people who look after your elderly parent in a care home. So the stakes are incredibly high in that space. And when I reach over into employability, which is a sector people don't often understand because it kind of created itself, the employability sector exists to help people into work who have perhaps been out of work for a longer period of time. So perhaps they're an ex-offender. Perhaps they have a disability. Perhaps they have been made redundant, have found it really difficult to find their way back into an alternative career. So the stakes are really high, and the regulation is also really high stakes in our space in terms of what we do. So when you take the context of the people that we support and what we do, because we operate fundamentally in what is in a people business, in the quality that we have to engage with, then it kind of becomes a question of it being a bit of a no-brainer about why do you need diversity around the table in order to be able to do that well. So if we don't have diversity of voice, so I'm going to broaden it out from being just about women. So diversity of voice sitting around the table, there is a risk that we make the wrong decisions. There is a risk that our focus in problem solving is so narrow that we aren't able to really see the solutions that can make a huge difference. And, if I take that again up to a kind of broader outside of quality macro level, I think the latest McKinsey study shows that if you looked at the 4 quartiles of successful businesses, the top quartile have a better representation of diversity on their board than those businesses that don't have that. There are some really excellent examples. I don't know if you've ever read Caroline Perez's book, Invisible Women, where she talks about the intrinsic bias in the way that products are designed and decisions that have been made at government level that we all take as being gender neutral, but actually aren't gender neutral at all. So there was a fabulous example of this back in November, actually, last year, whereby I think a university in Melbourne in Australia had undertaken some research where they looked at the plastic torsos that are used to teach people to do CPR and to do first aid. And although they're positioned as being gender neutral, you'll be able to picture one in your head now if you're listening to this, they're flat-chested. So they all look the same. They're not gender neutral, they're male neutral. And actually, even though the method of undertaking CPR is exactly the same, what they found is that people were less likely to support women. If a woman was going into cardiac arrest on the street, they're less likely to do CPR with that woman. And the reason that they found people were less likely to do it was the discomfort of touching the woman in that area where you would have to undertake CPR. So it's nothing to do with the difference in technique. It's about that product design intrinsically being biased around how it's done. There was a glorious example which hit the headlines, I think, in 2016, where Amazon had built its AI to support them with recruitment practices and fed it all of its data around software engineers over the years. And what came out was it booted out all of the women that had gone for software development roles because of the fact that it had been built in a way that dealt with historical data. Now, if you just look at where we're heading with AI, and I listened to your last episode on it, which I thought was excellent, by the way, you can see the risk of what might come for us if we continue to do that. So there are stacks of examples out there about why the risk of poor decision-making, poor problem-solving, lack of innovation comes out if we don't think about the imperative of making sure that you've got diversity around governance tables, but also around the quality table itself.
And as we get into the mid of the decade now, and AI is becoming a lot part of the norm in some businesses, I am fully conscious of historically we come into quality management and we say, let's base our decisions on facts, and facts we can get based on historical data. So let's see how the system works. And then you go, hang on a minute. Right now, we have to think differently on how we obtain facts and how we obtain the impact of the decisions that we make. Because you did mention about the software development. There was also another story, but don't quote me fully on this. It was about a random prompt that was put into one of the AI that says, what are the best government decisions that need to be made to enhance economies? Something along those lines, and the AI response promoted slavery.
Oh my gosh!
And that was early on in the days. I need to find back that news article that came, and you go, "What is this?" But again, it looks back into different areas, and you don't understand the algorithms. You don't understand where its sources that came from. That was when it early opened. Now there's a lot of work that's happened in that space. But that's when you go, we don't always need to think back.
No, and you make you said something at the beginning of your phrasing there about the right facts. And I think there's, we often talk about the importance of democratizing continuous improvement in our space. And I think actually women play a really key role in doing that. I'm always very reluctant to generalize on skill sets, But I think there are a lot of women who would say, actually, that feels like a comfortable place for them, about how do we help people to help themselves in order to deliver high quality. But the risk, as you say, is the more that we democratize the use of tools like AI, and literally all of us can get our hands on those now today in a way that we wouldn't have been able to not very long ago, those questions about, are these the right facts, become harder to control. So you have more and more people potentially drawing on data that continues, the snake that eats its own tail type scenario, whereby we get in an ever decreasing circle of the facts are based on data that continue to exacerbate bias in what we do. So you get the product design scenario whereby we have torsos that are not really gender neutral, that we have AI that creates recruitment practices that do the exact opposite of the things that we said before. We've got to be really careful with where we go in that. And I do think we, as quality professionals, play a really key role in how we support the rollout of those tools. So yes, we democratize the use of them as part of a culturally sensitive approach to CI, but we do it with caution.
I spoke once with one of the champions of women in project management sector, and she mentioned something that was, you think, very basic, yet you have to stop to appreciate it. And she said, in all of those initiatives and progress to bring equality and equity and to be inclusive with the work that you're doing, this is not an easy switch. You have to be intentional.
Yes. Yes.
And you think, yes, yes, people have to now stop, think differently. And I keep saying that because this year, the CQI's World Quality Week theme is to think differently. And you think, yes, I have to stop and say, how can I be intentional about my process, about my mentoring, about raising the role model, about bringing different perspective and different voices, as you mentioned, Lou, which is really important around the table to foster and bring in that democracy of continuous improvement.
It is, and it's such a great phrase, isn't it? Around decision making and consideration being intentional. And I think that what I always think, it's not for me to speak on behalf of all women, and I would never do that. I think I can speak on the ones that I know when I say we don't need to be patronized. We don't need to be put. When you occasionally hear people saying, it's wrong that we have International Women's Week, it's wrong that we have quotas. Well, actually, I think if you asked any woman, they would happily say it would be great when we don't have to have an International Women's Week, and it'll be even better when we don't have to deal with quotas. Because actually, the reality is that intentional behaviour can be as simple as look around your board table, look around the room, and see what it looks like. And actually, if it already looks like, you don't have to go too far to realise that it's going to impact on the quality of your decisions if you're not able to see different groups represented. And I do think that's broader, as I know you would agree with as well. That's not just about women. That's about people who come with different life experiences, whatever that might be, that will make a fundamental difference to us ultimately being more successful in our organisations.
More than just a gender, so also that cultural diversity, generational diversity, regional diversity, all of those different areas. How can businesses and leaders bring in that intent and start fostering practices that welcome inclusive quality teams?
I think I'm kind of going to go a little bit back to what I said before around that. Don't forget the practicalities, the look at your recruitment process, look at the way that you're developing people, look at the way that you're mentoring, and think about that, not just about women, but also about how we intentionally go about engaging different groups in the workforce and what we do, and thinking about different ways in which people can engage with our occupation and the deliberate nature of increasing the visibility of it to people who wouldn't even know that it's necessarily there as an option. The one thing I would add to that, if I may, and I'm sure you'll have others to add as well, Rashad, would be this is never about pitting men against everyone else. It just isn't that. And I draw on, I'll go completely outside of our sector actually, and I will draw on my icon of feminist flag bearing, and it is Andy Murray, the tennis player, who I'm a great tennis fan. And even if I wasn't, he is such a brilliant ally of women, in so many things that he does. He will call out journalists. He will support women moving in sport. He talks about low pay within the sport. And therefore, my extra bit, if you like, is how do we ensure that men around the table are allies of that gender diversity, but also then collectively we are then allies of those other people, and that we continue to be curious about looking around the table at our team, number one, making sure that we have diversity of voice in the way that we collect data. Because if we don't think about how we collect that data, whether that be from our external customers to inform how we go about improving quality, whether or not it's about our own staffing base and how we pull that in, you have to be intentional about how you pull that data through, because otherwise we end up back in the space that you said before, which is the facts aren't necessarily the right facts on which we can build. So there's two things in there for me that I'm just adding to earlier. One is about the role men play and that absolutely crucial role you play as an ally in everything that we're trying to do, because we all want our organizations to be successful. The other one is for the quality team is go back and look at your methods of data collection and really think about whether or not those methods allow us to bring in the voice of the people who we want to bring it in from, that represent everyone from a person with a hidden disability through to someone who is feeling marginalized because they're non-binary and therefore don't feel like they can engage with our organizations in a particular way. We're coming out. I listened to a really interesting presentation a couple of weeks ago by a guy called Dr. Alex Hope, who works at Northumbria University. And Dr. Hope was talking about how more and more we're seeing consumers, he means in the broadest sense, B2B and B2C, make decisions based on values aligning with the organizations that they buy from. So making decisions differently, and it's starting to matter. So I do think we have that coming together of things that are corporate social responsibility and social value and our profitability, rather than that social value being that thing on the side that someone over there does in the seat that sits next to the quality team. That us being really, truly intrinsically part of that deliberation, because the two things are coming together. And there's a stack of research now to support that, not just, the anecdotal stuff that some of us might draw on occasionally.
Thank you very much, Lou. I am conscious of time, but I'm going to be greedy and squeeze in two more questions. In your experience and in your opinion, what role do industry bodies like the CQI play in supporting gender diversity and raising the profile of women in the profession?
I'm not just saying that because I happen to be on your podcast, Rashad. I think you play an enormously valuable role. You play it in terms of that piece we talked about before with visibility. You play it in the development path that you guys can provide to support women to move into those roles. I'll give you a very specific example. So one of the things that I know you guys are aware of is last year we set up the Quality Professionals Awards for further education and employability. And I stood on stage at that awards and said, we have a legacy on which to build here. One is about diversity in our sector. One is about celebrating your stories. The other is I want you to see this as a route to professionalizing what you do. And I won't be happy until some of you are standing on the stage at the CQI's International Awards. There's something for us in working together around, and together I mean much broader than you and I, around how do we reach into sectors where perhaps there are more women represented within those quality roles and allow them to become and support them to become part of your community, because there is so much for us to learn in crossing over between sectors. I know when I'm in a room with a quality manager in engineering and I'm in a room with a quality manager in education, the thread that runs between them is common in terms of what we're trying to do. And I think you guys play an absolutely enormously important role in making that happen. And I would have said the same to you if I'd been sitting in my seat at British Airways. The same as the one when I sat in Orange is the same as the one that I sit in now around employability and education. Your role is crucial. And I look forward to seeing how you take the agenda forward.
And then finally, Lou, I am a woman that's just starting my career now in any sector. And I would like to raise my profile and I would like to progress and sit on the table making decisions that matter, what advice would you give me?
That's a really big question. Okay, the advice I would give you is don't hold back on sharing your ambition with other people who potentially can support your career along the way. So let people know of your intent, that I want to progress, I want to do well, I want you to help me to get to that point. I think women can be really bad, and I'm sure I've been one of them over the years, in not feeling like I can expose that because there are connotation. It comes back to some of those societal changes we touched on before, where women who are seen to be ambitious are sometimes perceived to be pushy and perceived to be aggressive. There's a whole bunch of stuff that comes with that I think it stops women sometimes talking about their ambition. So I think we need to do that. I would attach to that is go and find yourself a mentor. So someone who you admire, someone who you can look up to, and it doesn't have to be another woman, who you actually think can help you to make that progress within your career that you would want to take. So that's the first one that I would bundle together. The second one is to really understand that power and leadership don't necessarily come from structural power. You don't need to have the job title in order to be a leader. And actually, the way to prove that you can become a manager or leader with the money that comes with it and the job that comes with it and the stress that comes with it is to demonstrate your leadership approach in other ways. So really thinking about that personal power base. How do you demonstrate your expertise in what you do in our roles as a quality person that understands the need for building a culture of quality, for example, that understands the need for collaboration, that supports people to do a great job? And information, sharing of information, curating of information is a power base in its own right. So think about that role that you can play as an influencer would be my second. And don't always attach leadership to a job title, because you can demonstrate your ability, which can help you to get to that point within your career as well, in terms of where you would want to get it to. I think that the third one I would say is probably the most useful thing I've ever learned in all of my career is learn how to manage your boss. Because when you learn how to manage an influencer up over, it gives you a huge amount of confidence in terms of the impact that you can have to inform change within your organization, and to really be able to use that person that you work for to help you to make those connections and to make that difference in the workplace. So it isn't that surprising that a lot of what I talk about are people focused, because that's the nature of when you grow up in contact centers, you learn fundamentally that people are the root of pretty much everything in terms of your success and where you want to get to. It doesn't matter anything else behind it. Things matter. That matters the most. So those would be the three things that I would talk about. Don't hide your ambition. Attached to that, get yourself a mentor. Understand that your power base is not necessarily structural or hierarchical. And that third one about learn how to manage up over very early on in your career. And I'm going to give you a fourth one, which is if you think you're working in an organization or even when you're sitting in the recruitment seat and you want that job and you even get a sniff of the fact that this organization isn't the one that's going to support you, don't hang around, just leave. Go and find a better fit for you where your values align with that organization and you can see that they're the sort of place that's willing to support you to be successful.
Those are brilliant advice and insights. If I just may share a couple of points as well, based on what you've said, I'll start with the last one. If your ambition, you want to be in a job, something that I've been also given an advice of early on is, if you know you are 100% competent to deliver the next role, that is too junior for you. You have to find a role where you can deliver and learn and challenge yourself. What is the point of moving to a role where you can do with your eyes closed? So always think about that at the back of your mind. You need the challenge. You need the good stress that would help you think differently, learn, open your horizon, and try to do things to build on your experience and competence. So don't just leave and put your ambition and say or think, I will only apply to that role once I am 100% confident I can do it all.
it's great. I know you've got another one. It's just such brilliant advice you've been given, because you're right. I think what you learn as you get older, but also as you get more senior, is that your growth does truly come on the edges of discomfort. It comes on the edges of saying yes to things that you don't really know what you're doing, and you find your way through it, because actually otherwise you just don't create that growth. And I think there's statistics out there, isn't there, Rashad, that says if you put a man and a woman next to each other who are looking at the same job description and person spec in order to go for a job, the man is more likely to go for it if they don't have all of the essential elements of it, and the woman is less likely not to. And that power base is about our cognitive power base, our cognition, about the way that we think differently and things. So I think that's great advice. I like that.
The second one and the last one is not an advice, but it's based on my own personal experience with all of my years of experience that I would not like to share, just as age related. But with all of that years of experience, I've had bosses and line managers and leaders that were both men and women. And I've had 2 women leaders who were directly my line manager. One of them, when I grow up, I want to be like her. And one of them, I do not want to be like her. But they were both good people, had good intentions, but had different leadership styles. One that sat well with me and benefited me. Another one that taught me how not to do things. Not because they were women, because that was 2 different leadership styles. So again, this is to go back to your point. Share your intent. Make sure you sit around the table. Make sure you bring a mentor. Make sure you verbalize and vocalize what works for you and what doesn't work for you is a very, very brilliant advice.
And your point, and sometimes I think men are worried about saying it, and I'm really glad that you have and you're not, which is this kind of notion of sisterhood where we all think all women are really good leaders. And actually, it's just not true. I worked for some terrible women bosses along the way. But as you said, I've learned from that by looking at them and saying, that's never going to be me. When I'm in that role, that I'm never going to behave in that way. And I've also worked and still work with some brilliant women along the way. So I think it's great advice, is look for, again, it comes with age, doesn't it? Is that look for organizations and people where your values align with each other. And that's when you're in your happy place at work. Where you get a disconnect between those things, it probably is the right time to, head off and look somewhere different.
Lou, thank you very much for sharing your insights and your experiences. It's an absolute delight to have you as my guest on this podcast. Thank you, Lou Doyle, for joining us on this episode of Quality Impact. Thanks to our producer, Luke Nixon. Please make sure you subscribe, download, and follow, and leave us a comment. We appreciate you tuning in. I've been your host, Rashad Issa. See you next month.